Disappearance Day of His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada, we're going to sing Saparshada Bhagavad Viraha Janita Vilapa. Yeya Nila Premadana Karuna Pracho Yeya Nila Premadana Karuna Pracho Heno Prabhu Kota Gela Ācārya Thakur Heno Prabhu Kota Gela Ācārya Thakur Kaha Mora Swarup Rupa Kaha Sanatan Kaha Mora Swarup Rupa Kaha Sanatan Kaha Dasa Raghunata Patita Pavan Kaha Dasa Raghunata Patita Pavan Kaha Mora Pata Juga Kaha Kaviraj Kaha Mora Bhatha Yuga Kaha Kaviraj Eka kale kota gela gora naturaj Eka kale kota gela gora naturaj Pashane kutibo mata Anale pashibo Pashane kutibo mata anale pashibo Goranga gunera nidhi kota gele pabo Goranga gunera nidhi kota gele pabo Se saba sangira sange ye koilo bilas Se saba sangira sange ye koilo bilas Se sangana paya kande naro tamadas Se sangana paya kande naro tamadas Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada ki jai. He who brought the treasure of divine love and who was filled with compassion and mercy, where has such a personality as Srinivas ācārya gone? Where are my Swarup Damodar and Rupa Goswami? Where is Sanatan? Where is Raghunath Das, the savior of the fallen? Where are my Raghunath Bhatta and Gopal Bhatta? And where is Krishnadas Kaviraj? Where did Lord Gauranga, the great dancer, suddenly go? I will smash my head against a rock and enter into fire. Where will I find Lord Gauranga, the reservoir of all wonderful qualities? Being unable to obtain the association of Lord Gauranga, accompanied by all of these devotees, in whose association he performed his pastimes, Narottam Das simply weeps. Hare Krishna. So, this morning, Srila Prabhupada's disappearance, we're going to read a verse from a different section of the Bhagavatam that deals with the disappearance of the spiritual master. And then we have some other books to read from as well. So let's see. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Nastaprayeshu Badreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Utamashloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki. By regular attendance in classes on the Srimad Bhagavatam and by rendering service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. So today we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 28. Text 48. A little closer here. Utishta Tishta Rajarshe Imam Udadhi Mekalam Dasyubhya Shatra Bandhubhyo Bibhyatim Patum Arhasi Utista Rajarshe Imam Udadi Mekalam Dasyubhya Shatra Bandhubhyo Bibhyatim Patum Arhasi Utishta Rajarshe Imam Udadi Mekalam Dasyubhya Shatra Bandhubhyo Bibhyatim Patum Arhasi Utishta Rajarshe Imam Udadi Mekalam Dasyubhya Shatra Bandhubhyo Bibhyatim Patum Arhasi Utishta Rajarshe Imam Mekalam Dasyubhya Shatra Bandhubhyo Bibhyatim Gatum Arhasi Utishta Rajarshe Imam Udadi Mekalam Shatra Bandhubhyo Dasyubhya Shatra Bandhubhyo Bibhyatim Patum Arhasi Utishta Rajarshe Imam Udadi Mekalam Dasyubhya Shatra Bandhubhyo Bibhyatim Patum Arhasi. Okay, word meanings. Utishta, please get up. Utishta, please get up. Rajarshe, O saintly king. Imam, this earth. Udadi, by the ocean. Mekalam, surrounded. Dasyubhya, from the rogues. Shatra Bandhubhya, from the unclean kings. Bibhyatim, very much afraid. Patum, to protect. Arhasi, you ought. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. O best of kings, please get up. Get up. Just see this world surrounded by water and infested with rogues and so-called kings. This world is very much afraid, and it is your duty to protect her. Please repeat. O best of kings, please get up. Get up. Just see this world surrounded by water and infested with rogues and so-called kings. This world is very much afraid, and it is your duty to protect her. Srila Prabhupada's purport. Whenever an ācārya comes, following the superior orders of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or his representative, he establishes the principles of religion, as enunciated in Bhagavad Gita. Religion means abiding by the orders of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Religious principles begin from the time one surrenders to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is the ācārya's duty to spread a bona fide religious system and induce everyone to bow down before the Supreme Lord. One executes the religious principles by rendering devotional service, specifically the 9 items like hearing, chanting, and remembering. Unfortunately, when the ācārya disappears, rogues and non-devotees take advantage and immediately begin to introduce unauthorized principles in the name of so-called swamis, yogis, philanthropists, welfare workers, and so on. Actually, human life is meant for executing the orders of the Supreme Lord, and this is stated in Bhagavad Gita, 9th chapter, 34th verse. Manmana bhava mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mam evaishasi yuktvaivam Atmanam matparayanaha. Engage your mind always in thinking of me and become my devotee. Offer obeisances and worship me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. End quote. The main business of human society is to think of the Supreme Personality of Godhead at all times, to become his devotees, to worship the Supreme Lord, and to bow down before him. The ācārya, the authorized representative of the Supreme Lord, establishes these principles, but when he disappears, things once again become disordered. The perfect disciples of the ācārya try to relieve the situation by sincerely following the instructions of the spiritual master. At the present moment, practically, the entire world is afraid of rogues and non-devotees. Therefore, this Krishna consciousness movement is started to save the world from irreligious principles. Everyone should cooperate with this movement in order to bring about actual peace and happiness in the world. Om Jnanatimirandasya Ganan Shalakaya Chakshurun Militanyana Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shri Mate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvase Shishunyavari Pashachare Shitarine Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubevacha Patitanam Pavanibhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So today the disappearance of His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada, and I believe this evening we'll be hearing from Prabhupada's disciples and followers with memories and pastimes and realizations. So I thought since it was Bhagavatam class this morning, we could do a Bhagavatam verse that deals with the disappearance of the spiritual master, and in this case the disappearance from our sight of the founder ācārya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So in this purport, Srila Prabhupada is explaining a very important understanding that the mission of the Lord is given by the Lord Himself and by His representatives, the ācāryas. Right? He says it is the ācārya's duty to spread a bona fide religious system and induce everyone to bow down before the Supreme Lord. So this is the whole real this is the Lord's purpose of the material world. Our purpose is a little different. We want to be the enjoyer and the controller, and we want to, we come to this world because we want sex, we want to eat meat, we want to get intoxicated, and we want to try to be the controllers and the enjoyers. And the Lord is so kind that in order to reciprocate with us, just like a father, sometimes, they have to let the child go out and do their nonsense, right? They get a taste of suffering, and then they wake up to their actual position and come back, and then the Father will receive them, right? So in the same way, Krishna, although he doesn't want us to suffer in the material world, because we are people and we have personality, we have free will, we have all the qualities that are required for relationships, right? Krishna fulfills our desires, but his purpose in the material world is quite different. His purpose is to bring us back home, back to Godhead, and for that purpose he incarnates himself. He comes as many different incarnations, and he sends his representatives, the great ācāryas, throughout history, throughout time, throughout cultures, throughout language groups. In one purport, Prabhupada even explains that the Lord appears in all different species of life, like that. So the Lord's mission is one-pointed, right? To reclaim the fallen souls. When he appears in his original form of Lord Krishna, and he brings his eternal Dhamma, Sri Vrindavan, he exhibits the topmost spiritual pastimes that are going on eternally in the spiritual world, just to attract our attention and to inspire us to come back home, right? And one of the amazing things that Lord Krishna exhibits in his Vrindavan Leela, and one of the reasons why he then appears as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, is that this concept, which is very fundamental to the teachings of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, that the highest state of love is felt in the mood of love and separation, right? Actually, Krishna, when he leaves Vrindavan, and everybody is confused, even like Uddhava, even like Balaram, not that Balaram's ever confused, but these different descriptions are there. Everyone is wondering, why doesn't Krishna come back to Vrindavan, right? This is like this big, like, everybody's, kind of like bewildered, like, is Krishna cruel? Like the inhabitants of Dwarka, like when they actually understand the situation of the Vrijavasis, those that are most close, like Uddhava. Uddhava was sent there as a messenger, and he observed firsthand. Balaram went there and observed firsthand the intense suffering that the Vrijavasis were experiencing. But Lord Krishna ultimately explains that he doesn't come back. Of course, he never leaves, but this is all very esoteric stuff. But he doesn't come back because he understands that the love and separation that they feel for him is actually giving them the highest state of love for God that exists, right? So this is a very core principle of our Gaudiya Vaishnava understanding of who we are and our relationship with the Lord. And when the ācāryas, on behalf of the Lord, come to this world, they are training us in love of God. Like Prabhupada points out here, the Bhagavad Gita verse, engage your mind always in thinking of me and become my devotee, offer obeisances and worship me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me, right? So this complete absorption, which enables us to surely come back home, back to Godhead. Everything is being done by the Lord and his representatives just to intensify that, right? When Narada Muni met the Bhaktivedantas as a little 5-year-old, and then his mother was bitten by a serpent, and he had been trained up by the Bhaktivedantas how to meditate on the Lord, and when he was suddenly found completely alone, he had no other shelter but the instructions in devotional service that he had received from the ācāryas. So he wandered on, and he began to practice those instructions, and very quickly, in his meditation, after he had touched water for purification and sat down in a lonely place and began to chant the mantras for meditation on the Lord that the Bhaktivedantas had given him, very soon the Lord appeared before him, and in great total ecstasy and rapture, it's described that every one of his senses became independently enlivened. We can't even imagine this state of consciousness. He was so focused on the form of the Lord in just complete loving devotion. He achieved the whole goal of life very, very easily and quickly by the grace of the Lord and the devotees, by following the instructions of the Bhaktivedantas. And then the Lord disappeared. And when he disappeared, Narada was completely crestfallen. Of course, he wasn't Narada yet. Even he was completely crestfallen. He was just hankering again for that beautiful form of the Lord to absorb his whole consciousness in. And he was tried again mechanically to get back in the groove and get back in the mantra. And then the Lord spoke to him in an unseen voice and said, I regret to inform you that you will not again see me in this life. But by engaging in my devotional service, by chanting my holy names, by being absorbed in my names, forms, qualities, and pastimes for the rest of this life, at the end of this life you will attain me. And he did. At the end of that life, that body died. He was immediately transferred to his eternal form as Narada Muni. And he continued constantly traveling, and to this day, we know, constantly traveling in the spiritual and material worlds, completely free, absorbed in hearing and chanting, right? So this meditation on the Lord in the mood of separation, this is the fire that is burning up our anarthas, right? And when the ācārya comes to this world, not only do they exhibit that, but they also teach that, right? When we read these songs by the great ācāryas in this intense mood of lamentation in separation from the Lord, or like the song we just sang, right, by Narottam Das Thakur, the intense separation he's feeling from Lord Chaitanya, from Rupa Goswami, from Sanatan, from the six Goswamis, from Srinivasacharya, right, from Ramachandra Kaviraj, from the great devotees, from Lord Chaitanya's associates, this intense separation that he's feeling, right? This separation is the inspiration for our development in devotional service in the deepest ways that we actually need to develop. This is that fire of lamentation is such a powerful force in our devotional life. So Srila Prabhupada, he took shelter of His Divine Grace Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada at their first meeting in 1922, yeah? And as he was leaving that first darshan, that first meeting with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, his friend asked him what he thought, and Srila Prabhupada said that, I met a wonderful saintly person, and Prabhupada reflected that the teachings of Lord Chaitanya are in the hands of a very, very expert saintly person. And Srila Prabhupada said that, not officially, but in my heart, from that moment, I accepted him as my spiritual master. And it was not for another 10 years, 12 years, that until Srila Prabhupada, took formal diksha. But from that moment, Srila Prabhupada was immediately molding his life. How can I serve Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur? And from the beginning of his service, most of the time it was in separation. Like we learn from the biographies that Srila Prabhupada may have only personally met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta like less than a dozen times, right? But every one of those times was extremely meaningful and extremely impactful in Srila Prabhupada's life. And in the midst of those meetings and between those meetings and for the rest of his pastimes, Srila Prabhupada was always completely, directly in the association of his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, by making Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's instructions the central theme of his life, right? When Srila Prabhupada read Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary to, I think it's 241, Vyavasayit Mikhail Budhir, one pointed intelligence, that the disciple, those who are on this path are resolute in purpose and their aim is one. O beloved child of the Kurus, the intelligence of those who are irresolute is many-branched. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explained that the disciple takes the order of the spiritual master as his very life airs, right? So we understand that the soul is floating on the life airs in the region of the heart, right? So that is our position. So there's nothing more, intimately connected with us, with the soul, than the life airs. And that order of the spiritual master is our very life airs. It's the sustenance of our existence, right? Right? Srila Prabhupada explained in one lecture, and I'd mentioned this before, but it's very pertinent today also. Srila Prabhupada explained that the disciple understands the order of the spiritual master, and he understands that it's his duty to carry out. And he slapped his hand and said, Bas. Bas is Bengali for finished, That's all. Nothing else, right? So Srila Prabhupada, he took the order of his spiritual master on his head as his life and his soul, right? And this was not a very easy thing for him to do. Srila Prabhupada came into the Gaudiya Math at the zenith, so to speak. When he took initiation in the Gaudiya Math was booming. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta started that organization, and by his pure devotion and his powerful preaching, it spread all over the Indian subcontinent. Right? They even opened center in Burma, right? And other places, and all over the Indian subcontinent, which is a very big place, especially in those days. This was before the political partition of India. So this included, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, like that, all these other parts of India. Very, very broad preaching going everywhere. And he was even sending his preachers to London, to Germany, like that. So this mission of Lord Chaitanya, of Lord Nityananda, that Krishna consciousness would be spread all over the world, that was the most central desire of the acharyas. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta set out to carry that mission out. For that purpose, he started a whole organization, and it spread like wildfire. But unfortunately, after Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's disappearance, there was an attack by Maya, and the unified preaching of that organization was nearly destroyed. And so I'm going to read a little something here from the Lilamrita. I'd like to read the whole, but because of the time, maybe I'm going to read this section, but this is kind of explaining how Srila Prabhupada took up this mood of Vani Seva and of service and separation to his spiritual master. So he taught this to us in ISKCON, but he also exemplified this in his own life. So I'm just going to read a little bit from the Prabhupada Lilamrita. On Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's disappearance day in 1958, Srila Prabhupada wrote an offering, and it was an offering of lamentation. He was lamenting that the great preaching movement that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had started had nearly been destroyed, and that the great distribution of love of Godhead that had brought into the world had been greatly reduced and was in danger of becoming extinguished like that. So in that intense mood of separation, Prabhupada wrote this poem. I'm just going to read a little bit leading into that, and then some verses from it here are quoted. So let me read this. This is after Srila Prabhupada had taken Vanaprastha, before he took sannyas, not long before he took sannyas actually. On the disappearance day of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Abai keenly felt separation from his spiritual master. He perfectly understood that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's instructions were more important than his physical presence, and that, in fact, the spiritual master was present within his instructions. In this way, Abai had always been with his spiritual master, yet on this annual day, Abai could not help feeling loss. He remembered how in 1932, he had been a grihasta and a new disciple. At that time, he had not been free to do as much service as now. Yet it had been in those years that he had been able to see his spiritual master, offer obeisances before him, eat the remnants of his prasadam, walk beside him, hear his voice, receive his personal glance. Abai thought of their meetings together. How powerful had been Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's mission! Exclamation point. His presses had been running day and night, printing magazines, books, the daily Nadia Prakash, and Europe had been a promising new preaching field. With Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur at the helm, the Gaudiya Math had entered into battle against Maya's forces, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had made all his disciples unafraid. Abai had always been eager to serve his spiritual master, to serve within the Gaudiya Math with its headquarters in Calcutta. But exactly how he would serve had never been clear to him until his last letter from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. So remember that last letter, he confirmed the original instructions that I have great faith that you can turn yourself into a very good English preacher, right? And this will be good for you and all who you come in contact with. He urged him to spread these teachings. You can inculcate these teachings in the English language in a way that the people will be able to understand, right? So Prabhupada recognized that as the same instruction that he first received. In between, when they had been together, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had emphasized, if you ever get money, print books. Noticing some immaturity in his disciples after they had gotten a big marble temple donated in Calcutta in Bagh Bazaar, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta personally told Srila Prabhupada that seeing this, he said, I wish that we could take the marble tiles from the temple and sell them and use the money to print books. And then he told him, if you ever get money, print books. So Abai looked back on the scene more than 20 years since his spiritual master's disappearance. The Gaudiya Math had been undone by its leaders, and everyone else had scattered like leaves in a storm. It was an unspeakable loss, and it was an old story how the big sannyasis had disregarded their spiritual master's instructions and had intrigued, disputed, litigated, violent party factions, false leaders claiming to be world ācārya, and which party had been right? No, both had been wrong, all wrong, because the Gaudiya Math had disintegrated. Now there were dozens of little maths and no preaching, no real preaching as before, when he, Simha Guru, had cast fear into the Mayavadis, had led an army of young, powerful preachers to march throughout India and the world. And the greatest sufferers of the Gaudiya Math's dissolution were the people, the non-devotees, who had little hope of being delivered from the batterings of Maya. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had begun a spiritual revolution, but that revolution had now been overthrown by Maya. The scattered particles of the Gaudiya Math had settled quietly into self-satisfied, insular, almost impotent units. And it was the people in general who suffered. Abai groped after memories of his spiritual master. He felt secure in that his own relationship with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was intact, continuing. Yet he felt helpless. He was diligently pursuing his spiritual master's order to preach in English. Yet without his spiritual master's physical presence, he felt small and very much alone. At times like this, he questioned the wisdom of having left his family and business, lamenting Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's absence and the fall of the Gaudiya Math. He composed a Bengali poem called Viraha Astika. So Satsvarup Maharaj quotes a few of the stanzas here in English, so because of the time I'll just read these. Srila Prabhupada, you are always compassionate towards the suffering jiva souls. On this occasion of your separation, I see only dejection. An unlimited ocean of mercy, cutting an illusion, Nityananda distributed an ocean of flood of love of God. The Jati Gosai stopped the stream, but coming yourself, Lord, you revealed this illusion. So once again, everyone was immersed in the flood of love, even one so fallen, insignificant, and sinful as I. On the strength of Lord Chaitanya's order, you sent all of your servants door to door as gurus. There was preaching everywhere, from the sea to the Himalayas. Now in your absence, everything is darkness. O Srila Prabhupada, you are always compassionate towards the suffering jiva souls. On this occasion of your separation, I see only dejection. In the same way that Advaita Prabhu brought Lord Gora, so did Bhaktivinoda pray. His enthusiasm brought you. On the strength of his enthusiasm, you came and made everyone understand that India is a holy land. One who takes his birth in the land of Bharata must make his life perfect and then preach to others. This Maha Mantra message you preached everywhere. Now in your absence, Lord, everything is darkness. Your ocean of compassion has again been stopped. The spear of great misery has cut through my heart. Without Lord Chaitanya's message, there is just confusion. Seeing this, all the Vaishnavas feel pangs of separation. The conditioned souls are all in darkness once again. They are searching for peace, but are dying in an ocean of anxiety. O Srila Prabhupada, you are always compassionate towards the suffering jiva souls. On this occasion of your separation, I see only dejection. There's a lot more to that poem, and I encourage all of you who live here, take advantage of this nice book of Prabhupada's poems. Balaram has a copy. He let me look through. Dasa Sutta Prabhu translated, and it's very, very amazing mood. So anyhow, Srila Prabhupada, who had lived through the dissolution of his spiritual master's mission, right? Who had actually experienced that, who had lived through it, but who felt that in spite of all that, the Vani Seva, the service to the instructions of his spiritual master, must go on. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada, from the ashes of the Gaudiya Math, Prabhupada had to do it. So he set out, started ISKCON, and it's quite amazing because when he started ISKCON, you see things in ISKCON that Srila Prabhupada did that really reveal it's a direct continuum of the Gaudiya Math. Like Srila Prabhupada, after he had a movement, right, just a few temples practically, and the movement started spreading. And very early, I think in like 1970, Srila Prabhupada started a GBC, a Governing Body Commission, right? So this acronym was coined by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta in some of his last instructions to his leading disciples. He said, I don't see any amongst you who would immediately become the next ācārya, and because of this great movement, I want you to form a Governing Body Commission. The most successful organization in India at that time was the railway system. And the railway system, to this day, it's probably the most successful organization in India, at least the biggest. And the railway system was run by a Governing Body Commission, a GBC. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta appreciated the value of this organizational structure. And he told his disciples to form a GBC to continue the preaching activities of the Gaudiya Math. Unfortunately, somehow influenced by Maya, Prabhupada says in some of the verses, in the further verses of ācārya, they didn't follow that instruction, and rather they made factions about who should be the next ācārya. So Prabhupada, living through all that, as soon as he had his organization, he formed a GBC. So sometimes I've heard devotees say that in that sense, ISKCON is the actual real continuing manifestation of the Gaudiya Math, because Prabhupada did that. He started a GBC. So anyway, we see Srila Prabhupada, he took that order as his life and soul, and the separation that he felt from his spiritual master, which caused this great lamentation in his heart, he got through that separation by Vani Seva, right? And he taught us from the very beginning that this Vani Seva is the most important and accessible way that all of us can maintain our relationship with and service to the spiritual master, which is our path of perfection. That's how we're going to become Krishna conscious, and that's how the world's going to become Krishna conscious, is that the devotees, they take the orders of their spiritual master and they serve, right? So Srila Prabhupada, for instance, the order from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta that if you ever get money, print books. So as soon as Prabhupada had some disciples, right, even before he came, he didn't come until he had printed 3 books. Or he had printed, well, maybe 4 if you count Easy Journey to Other Planets. And then when he had the first 3 volumes of the first canto printed, then he came to the West and began this preaching mission. And as soon as he had some disciples and they became serious, right, he organized the printing of books. I was reading yesterday Prabhupada's arrival in 1968 in Boston. It was a beautiful arrival in the airport. Devotees were chanting and dancing and so ecstatic to see Srila Prabhupada. Remember, he started the movement, there were a few temples, and then Prabhupada had that 3rd heart attack. And he tried to get better in New Jersey. He went to Stinson's Beach, near San Francisco. He tried there, but he felt he needed to go back to India to recover his health. And at that time, there were like 3 temples or something, very few, maybe a few more. And the devotees had to deal with that separation from Prabhupada. And Prabhupada, they were writing Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was writing back and saying things like, you are chanting there and I am chanting here, and the vibration is traveling all over the world. And through this shared vibration, we are connected. And he always, and he was explaining to them that this Vani Seva, the serving the instructions of the spiritual master, go on carrying out my orders, very soon I'll be back with you, like that. So devotees very early, they actually began this training of service and separation, and then the movement boomed and it exploded. And then it happened that very soon, like those early devotees like Mukunda Maharaj and Janaki and Shyamasundar and Malati and Brahmananda and devotees Gurudas, Jamuna, that intimacy that they had with Prabhupada's Vapu, Govinda Dasi, right, Gaurasundara, like that was not there as much because the movement exploded and it boomed. And Prabhupada, we understand, he traveled around the world 14 times. And he had to, because within a very few years, his movement was present on every inhabited continent. There were temples everywhere, and Prabhupada was constantly traveling, inspiring his followers, preaching to the public, like that. So very quickly, right, this mood of Vani Seva, Prabhupada was training us both through his teachings and practically, And it was interesting, I was reading one letter. Oh, actually, I tend to go all over the place. So after he arrived in Boston at the airport, what he did, he came to the temple, he complimented the devotees on their improving deity worship, and then he said, take me to the basement. Because in the basement was where the newly started ISKCON press was located, right? And they had printing presses down there, and the devotees at that time that were starting the publication of Prabhupada's writings, they had started Back to Godhead magazine. Prabhupada had restarted Back to Godhead magazine. They had a press downstairs. At that point, they were printing 50,000 copies a month. And Prabhupada was very eager to come down, and they were giving him a tour of the different machines. Prabhupada was so appreciative, and they said, what should we call this? And Prabhupada said, ISKCON Press. ISKCON Press, right? And Prabhupada was so enlivened. Like he toured that facility, and he was inspiring the devotees. And he told them at that time, he said, this press, this is my heart. Like that, And then one of the devotees said, Prabhupada, you are the heart of ISKCON. And Prabhupada said, yes, and this is the heart of my heart. Like that. So very, very early in the movement, right? Prabhupada, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had told him, if you ever get money, print books. So what happened? As soon as Prabhupada had some followers and some money, what did he do? He started printing books, and he started inspiring the devotees to print books. And then he started inspiring the devotees to go out and sell the books, right? Right, so this became an ever-increasing theme as the Krishna consciousness movement expanded. We see that all of the important instructions that Srila Prabhupada had received from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, these became the cornerstones of his ISKCON movement. These became the practical activities, right, that he engaged his disciples in. So much so that when he was speaking to, I believe it was the devotees in LA, either speaking personally or writing, he said, practically, I am whipping them, right? Distribute books, distribute books, distribute books, right? And he was guiding the devotees like that. Go out on Harinam, chant the holy names, distribute Back to Godheads. Then when the books started coming out, distribute books, like that. So this is Srila Prabhupada's life and his teachings. They are the perfect example of Vani Seva, right? And Prabhupada taught us that Vani Seva is how we can continue, right? And this is how the disciple survives and has a meaning to their life after the disappearance of the spiritual master. Actually, one thing I read yesterday in thinking about this opportunity to speak, I was remembering something Satsvarupa Maharaj had written not long after Prabhupada's disappearance. And he began it by saying, practically every devotee can remember, where they were, what they were experiencing when they received the news of Prabhupada's departure. So in my own little world, by 1975, I was kind of at the peak of my involvement with Prabhupada's movement, mostly in Philadelphia Temple. And unfortunately, I fell away in 1976, and I was not following strictly for about 2 years, and I wasn't around as much, and I was a bit out of touch. I would go to the temple, but I wasn't there nearly as much as I had been. And anyway, somehow or other, one day I went to the temple one morning, and it happened to be this day. And I came in, and the temple was like usually this source of intense joy. Like you just walked into a temple, you heard bell ringing somewhere, you smelled the offerings being cooked, the incense, devotees were all bright-faced and jubilant, and I got there in time for greeting the deities. And it was like a morgue, like all the devotees were walking around just like white, ashen-faced, and it was, I couldn't figure it out. I was completely bewildered, frankly. And then Bubrit, who was the treasurer, a friend of mine, brahmachari, saw me and saw my confusion and took me aside and said, we just sorry, I'm kind of an emotional person, so anyway, I don't mean to be. He said, we just received the news that Prabhupada just left the planet. And I was like, just dumbfounded, because the only time I ever saw him was 2 years before, when he came and spent 5 days. And at that time, Prabhupada, my first glimpse of Srila Prabhupada was, I was helping clean the porch. He was going to walk across when he got there, and I had to stay back to keep it clean because devotees kept running in with last-minute errands, and it was raining a lot. So they would get mud all over the porch. I would clean it. They would get mud all over the porch. Finally, Rupanuga, he was GBC. He came by and said, "What's going on?" I said, "That this keeps happening." He said, "Here, take this rope, put a little cord across there, put a, Anyway, long story. But so then I ran upstairs and took a shower and got dressed, and I was running down the temple stairs from the Brahmachari ashram, and all of a sudden I heard this kirtan, and I looked out, and Prabhupada had just gotten out of his car, and there was a sidewalk, and then you got to the temple property itself, and there was a long walkway right from, and I looked out, and there was Srila Prabhupada, just like devotees say. He was like shining, and it was an amazing sight, because all these young devotees beating drums and kartals, they appeared to be running behind him. Prabhupada was like walking. It was just like this, and then I just did full dandavats in the hallway there, and when I came up, Prabhupada had already, turned the corner, traversed the whole walkway, come up the porch, and he was like from me to that door, and the temple room was right here, like there. There was a door to the temple, so then, Prabhupada, I saw him as I was getting up, and then Prabhupada turned and went into the temple room, the caravan of devotees behind him. But the spiritual energy that was emanating from Srila Prabhupada's Vapu was like nothing I'd ever experienced, ever. It was just like, wow, And the whole time Srila Prabhupada was there, in terms of Vapu Seva, that was the experience. It was like he was just generating so much transcendental real life. When you're, real life is spiritual, and pure devotee is just emanating that. So my whole experience of Srila Prabhupada was, it just was inconceivable to me. I just never even, because I was out of it at the time and I wasn't around as much, I wasn't so up to date on what was going on. So when they said Srila Prabhupada had disappeared, I was just like thunderstruck, just shocked. And I remember my first thought when I heard that was, I guess it's all over. That was my first thought. I just thought, wow, it's all over. Because Srila Prabhupada was, at that time, was so much in the center of everything that we did, everything that we, our whole, actually, in those days, we had a painting of Srila Prabhupada on the Vyasasan, and then when he would come, take the painting down, he would sit there personally. But the worship was going on in that way. And Srila Prabhupada was, so much the center of everyone's, Hare Krishna, everyone's lives in ISKCON that, you just didn't really imagine ISKCON without Prabhupada. So I was very immature, and my first thought was that now it's all over. And I was kind of stunned, so I just stayed at the temple all day and, just did whatever I could, little service, and just sort of, and I was watching and experiencing, and what I experienced, I started noticing that, all the offerings were being cooked and all the artis were being done, and in spite of the fact that everybody was practically in a coma from suffering, everything was going on. And I left there at night, and by the time I left, I realized, no, it's all going to go on, it's going to continue, because immediately, as soon as that message came, the devotees just totally switched into Vani Seva mode, and that burning fire of separation that was consuming everyone's hearts just turned into this intense need to take shelter of Srila Prabhupada's instructions. And that's what I saw that day amongst the devotees. And I got home, I actually had a girlfriend, and she had become a devotee. She'd come back out to try to get her son, to bring him back to devotional service. Anyway, it took a long time. And I told her, Srila Prabhupada just left. And I mean, this is how devotees were in those days. She said, take me to the temple. She moved back in that day. Anyhow, sorry. Don't mean to be so emotional, but so, you know, that's really what we learned from Prabhupada's disappearance, is that the real service is serving the order. And this whole movement is a manifestation of devotees serving Srila Prabhupada's order. Because when Prabhupada left this planet, there were 108 temples. And I don't know, now, I mean, you look at those lists, there's what, 600, 700, 800? I mean, it's like, it's continued to grow. And the reason it's continued to grow is because Prabhupada exemplified in his own life, he taught and he inspired his disciples, right? Great souls like Dravida Prabhu, Mother Kanchan Bala, Bhadranarayan Maharaj, all these wonderful devotees. He put it into their hearts, this serving the Vani. And they took Srila Prabhupada's orders on their head, just as Srila Prabhupada took Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's orders on his head. And they have continued, for all of our benefit, to expand this movement to every town and village on the surface of the globe in fulfillment of Lord Chaitanya's order, like that. So we are very, very fortunate that we have the association of Srila Prabhupada in his Murti form and his disciples, and we have the continued opportunity, even ourselves, and this is not a Ritvik thing, but Srila Prabhupada, he's the founder ācārya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, and one thing that's been experienced since Prabhupada's personal departure in his Vapu form is that every one of us can also experience serving Srila Prabhupada through serving his Vani, through serving his instructions, not in jumping over our gurus in that way, but our gurus want nothing more than for us to be absorbed in Srila Prabhupada's mission, right? And I think everyone can attest to this, just like in the course of one's devotional service. Is there anybody here who, while sincerely rendering their service, hasn't felt a connection with Srila Prabhupada? I'm not trying to put anybody on the spot, but that's, you felt that, right? You're out there distributing books, you're cooking an offering, you're trying to get something done. Why are you doing it? To please Guru, to please Krishna, to please Srila Prabhupada. As the founder ācārya, Srila Prabhupada is the primary Shiksha Guru, right? For everyone in ISKCON, not just for the initial generation of disciples, but for generations upon generations. This is the unique position of our founder ācārya. His teachings form the bulwark, defense of this battle against Maya that we are all engaged in. And we derive so much benefit from Srila Prabhupada's teachings, and we derive a direct through our spiritual master's connection with Srila Prabhupada through his carrying out his orders and following his teachings. So anyway, I probably went on a little long. And Dravida Prabhu, would you like to?
I would just recommend. You remember when for years here, we'd have a Prabhupada lecture once a week.
Yes.
And at a certain point, we stopped that. We had so many devotees, who should and didn't get a chance to give classes. So it was felt okay, we couldn't do that. But we should try to, if we don't reinstate that, which I'm not proposing we do, but devotees should take the opportunity now that Prabhupada's Vani is so widely available for free and you can put it on your iPad or iPod or whatever you got. In other words, you can just download all his lectures, and it's worth going through. I somehow never had this experience where I couldn't understand him. And then after a while you could understand the accent. Some devotees think, well, I couldn't understand what he said. But if you do have that problem, if you try, and especially we have transcripts and everything, then after a while you'll be able to understand his accent, and it's definitely worthwhile doing that. Plus, these extraordinary videos that were produced by Yadubar Prabhu and his wife, the Following Srila Prabhupada. Most of you probably don't know this was at least 10 years ago. And the intervals are getting mixed. It could have been 20. No, it's not that long. But anyway, he came down here because he was living up in. It was February. Got a little cold up in Sharanagati, So he had a lot of work to do in putting in subtitles, English subtitles. Most of the talk that's going on there is English. Prabhupada's quoting some verses and everything. But it was a large contingency of Indians in UK who were involved with the temple, more than any other country outside of India. And they were complaining they couldn't understand the English accents and the Australian accents and the American. So he spent at least a month or more sitting in my back room there and working on it and transcribing. And so though they all have the subtitles, but they're just extraordinary, because you can get Prabhupada's image and his interactions with devotees, and the kirtans. There's Madhudvish. 1970 Ratha Yatra in San Francisco was like a seminal event in ISKCON. There were no big Ratha Yatras all over the country, and that was the biggest. There was no Mayapur festival in 1970, right? But this was the biggest festival there had ever been in ISKCON. Devotees came from all over the country and even from abroad. And Prabhupada, of course, was there, and that was the time Brahmananda was in Japan, insisting to Dainapan that Krishna book be done. He wanted to present it to his spiritual master, and they said, "Oh, it's impossible." I said, "Well, this is going to make have a big ramification for our involvement." They were, And so then the famous thing, it was recently recounted how, he's practically getting on the plane. That in those days you had the little stairway that you had to go out on the tarmac, So he's walking toward that stairway and a big limousine comes out onto the tarmac, and there was a bunch of Japanese executives in there all dressed up, and they presented him with the first box, with the first thing. And he gave it to Prabhupada. He had sold one on the plane, All of these things are available, and you can really get a feel of the incredible excitement and experience of being there when Prabhupada arrived in the temple, I mean, it's the closest we can get now to that, extraordinary event. And there's even some miracles that are recounted in there. I just was listening to one, Prabhupada in Melbourne, Australia. And, anyway, I won't go through the whole thing. But he would go walking into botanical gardens, wherever there's botanical gardens, he would go. In New York, they had, because the English were really into that, and they had a big, role to play in the first days of America too, in New York and whatever they call it at that time. So there's a botanical garden. So he's walking, and it's early in the morning, and there's a lot of dew on the ground. So this one devotee says, "I'm going to try to get some of the dust from Prabhupada's lotus feet." But of course he was he was walking behind, and Prabhupada was walking in front. So they're walking on the grass, and he's seeing all these footprints the devotees are making, and he couldn't see any footprints down there. Well, so he got really low, and somehow, he's looking, and there were no footprints. And he says, and then he remembered Yudhishthira. It's not like Prabhupada was walking off the ground, but no footprints. And then one devotee carried Prabhupada upstairs. There was an incredible house they had next door to the temple that they had not built but refurbished for Prabhupada. And so there was no, elevator or anything, but he was on the second floor. His quarters were on the second floor. So one devotee was assigned to, carry Prabhupada upstairs rather than doing the palanquin thing and everything. So he was, well-built devotee. So the time came and he carried Prabhupada. He hardly weighed anything. He didn't feel. It these things are recounted. Anyway, I highly recommend that. Following Srila Prabhupada, I think there are 11 different versions. Each one is like 3 hours long, so you can spend a good time. So this is a nice way to associate with Prabhupada and get that feel for how it would be to be in his presence. And some of the remembrances are just really memorable, so to speak. So I just recommend that.
Thank you, Dhruva Prabhu. Does anyone else like to contribute before we end? So this evening we'll have lots of remembrance and...
Starting at 5:30, we'll have Kirtan, and then 6 we'll have the remembrances, I think, for an hour. And then there'll also be an Abhishek. If you're interested, if you're able, today during noon at 10 to 12, we'll have also a Pushpanjali for Prabhupada. And there'll be, I shouldn't say Abhishek, there'll be a Pushpanjali for Prabhupada in the evening also.
So what are you saying? 10 minutes before 12. Okay.
10 to 12 is standard time we have,
So if anyone's listening online, Dravida Prabhu is pointing out that just before noon today, there'll be 10 till 12, there'll be Pushpanjali and Arti and Kirtan. Will they offer Prabhupada Guru Puja at that time? Do you know?
Yeah. Sure, the worship Prabhupada during the Arti is going on.
Right. Okay, so...
That'll also be repeated tonight.
Right, so at the noon Arti, there'll be worship of Srila Prabhupada with Guru Puja, and then again this evening beginning at 5:30. Beginning at 5:30, the Disappearance Festival of Srila Prabhupada will be held, so everyone please come. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, Transcendental Disappearance Day of Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Hare Krishna.